Hello everyone, the last Reptilian here, and today's video is going to be based on questions from the cesspool that is Salon.com. The title of the article is White Fragility is Real. 4 questions white people should ask themselves during discussions about race. Well, I have had multiple conversations about race, so I'll probably be guilty of white fragility when it comes to this specific subject. But before we get into these questions, I want to read these few paragraphs and respond to them because we get a good look into who the author of this article really is. On Facebook, I'm fortunate to be friends with scores of people, white and black, who are outraged at these deaths and others like them, and who are willing to shout down overt racism when they see it. But when difficult discussions about race arise, there always emerges a coping mechanism that all white people are privy to, and that is equally damaging as blatant racism, and one that not all of us realize we're employing: white fragility. I love that it's all white people who are privy to this coping mechanism that is equally damaging as blatant racism. White fragility is a phrase coined by author Dr. Robyn DAngelo and is defined as a state in which even a minimal amount of racial stress becomes intolerable, triggering a range of defensive moves. According to DAngelo, most white people live in a social environment that insulates them from race-based stress due to their privilege as part of the cultural majority. In turn, says DAngelo, whites are infrequently challenged and have less of a tolerance to race-based stress, causing them to be hostile, guilty, defensive, or fearful when confronted. This phenomenon is white fragility. In the end, white fragility ensures that conversations about race are derailed and the status quo of white supremacy is upheld. Okay, let's see who Dr. Robyn DAngelo is. This is from our website, robynDAngelo.com. This video is sponsored by Robyn DAngelo, by the way. No, I'm just kidding. I don't want to get in any trouble. Anyway, Robyn DAngelo, PhD, Critical Racial and Social Justice Education. Sounds like a bunch of well-paying courses to study. Academic. I received my PhD in Multicultural Education from the University of Washington in Seattle in 2004. Dr. James Banks is my dissertation chair. I earned tenure at Westfield State University in 2014. I have taught courses in multicultural teaching, intergroup dialogue facilitation, cultural diversity and social justice, and anti-racist education. My area of research is in whiteness studies and critical discourse analysis, explicating how whiteness is reproduced in everyday narratives. Oh my god. So this doctor's areas of expertise are in whiteness studies and critical discourse analysis on how whiteness is reproduced in everyday narratives. Oh my. She is definitely a unique individual. Before we go back to those questions, I really want to quickly read a bit about her personal life, as I believe you'll find it quite interesting. Personal. I grew up poor and white. While my class oppression has been relatively visible to me, my race privilege has not. In my efforts to uncover how race has shaped my life, I have gained deeper insight by placing race in the center of my analysis and asking how each of my other group locations have socialized me to collude with racism. In so doing, I have been able to address in greater depth my multiple locations and how they function together to hold racism in place. I now make the distinction that I grew up poor and white, for my experience of poverty would have been different had I not been white. So, Dr. DAngelo believes that because she is white, she pretty much made it out of poverty, and because if she wasn't white, things would have been very different for her. I love how she says that she placed race at the center of her analysis. I mean, these people are just obsessed with race. It's crazy. Alright, anyway, let's go back to the questions. I consider myself an ally, but I frequently need to check myself against white fragility in order to make sure I help center the conversation where it's appropriate. Black deaths at the hands of law enforcement, and not on feelings of white guilt, anger, or denial, mine or anyone else's. You better check yourself or you wreck yourself. Question 1. Am I trying to change the subject? Raise your hand if you've heard or said the following. Arguing on Facebook is pointless. All lives matter. Why are we talking about this when we've got whatever to worry about? I have heard the first one. It wasn't on Facebook. It was over a Skype conversation, and it was the black person I was talking to who was saying it. Once I brought up crime stats by race, they desperately wanted the conversation to end then. All lives matter is not a bad thing. And the final one, yeah, whatever, they are deflecting in that example. In other words, this translates to, I'm uncomfortable. Can we talk about something else? And it harkens back perfectly to what DAngelo, you remember good old DAngelo, says about racial comfort. In the dominant position, whites are almost always racially comfortable, and thus have developed unchallenged expectations to remain so. When racial discomfort arises, whites typically blame the person or event that triggered the discomfort, usually a person of color. White insistence on racial comfort ensures that racism will not be faced. White people don't like to be uncomfortable or challenged. I'll certainly own to that. What's with the white people this, white people that? You personally don't like being challenged. Me, I love it. I encourage it. Please debate me on race. I'm not a little bitch who's gonna cower away from a conversation about race and blindly accept what a black person has to say as gospel. I will challenge that shit if I disagree and prove them wrong. To enact change on a large scale, however, white people need to have painful, uncomfortable conversations about white privilege, white supremacy, and about how we benefit from it. Otherwise, nothing will change. I just want to know what white privilege I have. Is it the privilege of being labelled racist just for existing? Is it the privilege of being blamed for slavery and asked to apologise for it? Is it the privilege of being the only race where it appears to be okay to be racist to? What is this ominous white privilege that I supposedly have? And white supremacy? How in the fuck does white supremacy come into play here? Yes, I will not have painful, uncomfortable conversation about white supremacy because it's fucking irrelevant. It's irrelevant. We don't live in a white supremacy society. If we did, there wouldn't be black generals, black Supreme Court justices, black elected officials, a black fucking president. So don't give me this bullshit about white supremacy, you fucking invalid. Am I using inappropriate humour to deflect? One major way I've noticed white people derail conversations about race is to inappropriately inject a little humour. During one online conversation, when things started getting heated, a white person who hadn't been part of the conversation prior to that moment parachuted in on the comment thread and posted a picture of two Labrador retrievers with the caption, Black Labs Matter. All labs matter. Okay then. In another online discussion, an acquaintance tried to diffuse the tension by posting YouTube compilations of puppies in the comment section. By the way, fellow white people, what is it with us and dogs? In both instances, the conversations grounded to a halt, and the women of colour in the conversation were understandably pissed. Sometimes humour can be healing, but sometimes it can minimise another person's pain. So what? This isn't a white thing where people make jokes during the discussion. Sometimes it is needed in these types of conversations, as things usually get pretty heated, and it needs to be calmed down a tad or two, or it just becomes a giant shouting match. I joke all the time, but that doesn't mean what I'm saying is irrelevant. If someone says something so utterly stupid, there's no point even refuting it because it's so dumb. Of course someone will make a joke about it. My example I gave earlier, that conversation on race, after countless times of giving out crime stats and police stoppings and saying this is a pretty big factor as to why black people are shot, he just ignores it and says I'm lying and refuses to do his own research. So what am I supposed to do in that situation? Just be like, oh okay, that's fair. Let's continue on. I know you don't want to see any stats that go against what you blindly believe, but that's okay. Let's move on to another silly point you have. No. I made a joke about how stupid he is because there's nowhere to go from there. He doesn't accept the facts, so why should I continue on with someone who doesn't accept reality? Am I getting defensive or angry? As a white woman, I know I'm absolutely cocooned in privilege. The colour of my skin gives me an advantage when I'm applying for a loan, interviewing for a job, or even being taken seriously when I speak. Mate, as a fellow white person, I'm not taking you seriously when you speak. So far, you have just shown to the world that you are an idiot. But sometimes hearing from other people that how privileged I am can send a jolt of hot anger through my body. I forget that having white privilege doesn't mean my life has been perfect, or that I've never had a single hardship, or that I've never suffered a loss. I have. Then it isn't really much of a privilege then, is it? If this supposed privilege all white people have doesn't protect them from having a shitty life, yet they're still more privileged than any black person. Like, that doesn't make any sense. I mean, look at Will Smith. He is definitely less privileged than me. President Obama, less privileged. And don't give me this shit that, oh, well, compared to the average black person, you are more privileged. So, well, then it isn't exactly a racial issue then, is it? It's just a select group of black people that I am more privileged than. It has nothing to do with race. Will Smith and Obama are more privileged than me, whereas Jamal from down the street isn't. That isn't a racial thing. That is usually a class thing. Anger is something I see and personally experience, often when I'm confronted with racial issues, because accusations sting. I know theoretically that white people have oppressed and colonized indigenous people and people of color, and the events of that are still felt to this day, from the Rwandan genocide to apartheid to the subliminal fear of black men that killed Philando Castile. But hearing that I'm part of the problem, that hurts. You know, theoretically, that because some whites did some bad stuff a long time ago, that means that because of that, whites reap the benefits today. So we should all feel guilty and pity the poor black people. DAngelo explains this perfectly in her paper on white fragility, and when she states, people of color are almost always seen as having a race, and described in racial terms, the black man, but whites rarely are the man, allowing whites to see themselves as objective and non-radicalized, or racialized, sorry. Race and racism become their problem, not ours. Race isn't a problem, racism is, and it's a two-way street. It isn't just black people who are subject to racism, every race is. Just because we don't describe white people as white a lot of the time, doesn't mean that racism against us just magically disappears. I may be outraged by the deaths of Sterling and Castile. I may have never participated in slavery or personally colonized a country, but you can bet that I still benefit and enjoy privileges that my friends of color don't. I'm still part of the problem. I recognize that. I hope to be part of the solution. This woman is insane. You just said that you never participated in slavery or colonized a country, yet because you supposedly benefit from that, you're part of the problem. That means every single white person born today is part of the problem just because they're white. The real problem that I see here is that you have white guilt, which you addressed earlier that you do in fact have white guilt, and the solution to that is to stop feeling bad about yourself because of something you have no control over. Your skin color shouldn't be something you are ashamed of. Your personality, on the other hand, being a submissive little bitch to anyone who isn't white, is something you should really be ashamed of, not your skin color. Am I going out of my way not to focus on the negative? If you have white friends, or are yourself a fragile white person, I can almost guarantee you've said or heard the phrase negativity in reference to the uproar around Sterling and Castillo's deaths, be it the news itself or the way people are responding to it. One popular Christian blogger I follow, a white woman, wrote a brief blog post about the Dallas shootings, begging her readers to choose love and forgiveness instead of dwelling on the negativity. It sounds noble, but asking others to choose love and forgiveness, especially so soon after suffering a tragedy, is just one way of many to minimize black pain. Consider this: if you think it's inappropriate to go to a funeral and tell the bereaved to cheer up and focus on something positive, then it makes no sense to call for forgiveness or flood your Twitter with positivity immediately after a shooting. Right now, people need to grieve and feel some feelings. Let them. I personally can address the issue of police brutality. The problem I have with the way you and others like you go about these things is that you only focus on one part of the problem and give stupid reasons as to why this problem exists. Focusing on black victims of police brutality isn't going to stop police brutality. Making it a race issue isn't going to solve the problem. You have to look at the overall issue of police brutality and address that. Forget your bullshit cries of racism and look at the mitigating factors such as, was it a justified shooting? If not, why? If so, move on. Look at why black people are stopped more by police. Because they statistically commit more crime than any other race. Making everything about racist white cops and poor innocent black people isn't helping because it isn't true. And your funeral analogy is just garbage. To be honest, at a funeral there are many people who are focusing on something positive, such as the good things the person who died did or the good times they had together. Isn't all grief and utter sadness. And this people need to grieve and feel some feelings, let them. It sounds nice, but when you look upon the people after these incidents, especially the Dallas shooting, you see a ton of people feeling happy about cops being murdered, yet sad about black people being killed, whether they're innocent or not. In the wake of Sterling and Castillo's shooting deaths, my white friends and I feel hopeless, anger, desperate to help in some way. I certainly don't know how to repair systematic white supremacy, but what I do know is this: when white people get defensive, conversations grind to a halt, understanding stops, feelings are repressed, tension builds, nothing is resolved. Well, that's you and your friends just feeling white guilt. It's pushing its way to the surface. You don't desperately need to help in some way, and I highly doubt you felt the same when an unarmed innocent white man was shot, because that doesn't fit your white supremacy narrative, which is ludicrous to begin with. Just I want to address these final few sentences like in depth compared to the rest, because it's very paramount I get this across. When white people get defensive, conversations grind to a halt. What are they getting defensive about? Is it the bullshit white privilege they supposedly have, the white supremacy, controlling everything that isn't real, the accusations of being racist because they don't automatically agree with black people, that the black people who were shot were innocent and they didn't deserve it? Understanding stops. Feelings are repressed, tension builds, nothing is resolved. You can't understand a group of people that say all cops are racist, or white people are privileged, or that black guy didn't do nothing, but more times than not he did do something. Want to help? Don't be a fragile white person. Get uncomfortable and get used to it. I'm not uncomfortable with discussions on race, and I'm certainly not a fragile white person. In fact, it's mainly fragile black people all over this topic saying how they're such victims. Oh, I'm such a victim. Oh, I'm oppressed. But yeah, keep pushing your anti-white agenda to everyone, you white guilt-riddled cretin. Thank you, Sarah Watts, for that insightful explanation of why I'm a pussified little bitch and need to believe black people and everything. Anyway, thank you for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and if you didn't, comment below why and we can discuss it. This has been The Last Reptilian. Farewell.